Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Emmett, and today I will be walking you through the world has been dominated by the principle of survival of the fittest. Before the advent of civilization, this idea of natural selection existed within the bounds of which monkeys could climb to the banana faster. However, as humans evolved and began to form societies, no longer were the days of racing to bananas. Now, humans were lobbing stones, then spears, then arrows at each other for the purpose of taking land, conquering resources, or spreading religion. And this need to constantly be better than one's enemies led to the exponential development in technology for war and for peacetime. In this video, I will be going through the AP Modern World textbook, unit by unit, and discussing why the military innovations of the most dominant society of each unit are important and how they influence the world today with continuity and change. For Unit 1, the obvious choice for the most powerful society would be the Mongol Empire. Built largely by Genghis Khan, it was once the largest contiguous land empire in the world and would be known far and wide as one of, if not the greatest and most powerful empire to ever exist. However, this success was not an accident. The technologies and tactics invented and used by the Mongols were the sole reason for their massive success in Eurasia, and without them, the empire would have certainly not been as renowned as it is today. In the Mongol Empire, the tactics they revolutionized to become the dominant empire in Asia for hundreds of years were as follows: the decimal system, feigned retreat, and composite bows and short horses. In the decimal system, which involves splitting up civilians and military groups in groups of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, Genghis Khan was able to mold his massive armada of men into an ultra efficient war machine, overpowering and outmaneuvering his enemies. He was also able to keep a census of his troops and civilians, allowing for a more organized civilization. Another revolutionary system designed and perfected by the Mongols is the feigned retreat tactic. The Mongols would attack, then appear as if they were retreating, then surprise attack their enemies and finish them off later on. This tactic proved extremely useful when fighting larger numbered enemies across Eurasia. Probably the most important innovation made by the Mongols was their use of short horses and composite bows for lightning fast offense strikes against their enemies. The Mongols trained relentlessly with bows and arrows on horseback, and this allowed them to travel for days on end and hit their enemies from afar. Ultimately, these innovations allowed the Mongols to expand rapidly, spreading their influence across Eurasia and establishing what is known as Pax Mongolica. On top of this, the innovations created by the Mongols were used by civilizations and empires that followed them, like the Safavids and other Middle Eastern and Asian empires. Unit 2, the Song Dynasty. The Song Dynasty has some significant innovations crucial to the continued development of weapons and tactics as the connectivity of the world increased through time. Some of these innovations include developing an early form of gunpowder, an advanced navy, and a somewhat new unit, crossbow soldiers. Gunpowder, which was originally used for things like fireworks, eventually became probably the most influential and important piece of military technology of all time, giving birth to guns, bombs, cannons, and almost every single other ballistic weapon. On top of the wartime purposes, it also was used in things like dynamite, which was used to rapidly clear mountains and plots of land for things like the U.S. railroads, which in and of itself was revolutionary. This is an example of the continuity of gunpowder or an innovation and the change in which it was used over time. Another innovation was that of the Navy, which the Song dynasty was pretty much the first to create a ultra-powerful navy, and it sent ships all along the Indian Ocean coastlines. Finally, the Song Empire designed some of the first crossbow units used in the world and in Asia, which made volleys of arrows easier to shoot, allowing for less skilled archers to now be almost as accurate as regular bowmen with a somewhat increased range depending on the pound strength of the crossbow. Unit 3, the Ottoman Empire. This empire, which is correctly known as a gunpowder empire, was at one point in time a dominant power in the Mediterranean and surrounding area. As their empire grew, some innovations were needed in order to match the unequivocal power creep in the world's militaries at the time. Some of these innovations included janissaries, more advanced guns and cannons, and some religious tolerance, although not as much as the Mughal Empire. These innovations differed from previous empires because of the advancement in technology of the era, and the advancement in tolerance in the era. Guns were much more efficient than in previous decades, and the use of religion for peace and for war allowed the Ottomans to take advantage of some people's strongest beliefs to destroy their enemies. The Janissaries were elite warriors who, at a young age, were taken from the Christian reaches of the largely Muslim Ottoman Empire and who were trained and taken care of at the highest level by the military. These soldiers grew up to be the strongest and most tactically advantaged of the Ottomans' ranks and were sent on important missions like in the war between the Ottomans and the Byzantines during the fall of Constantinople. The fall of Constantinople, coincidentally, was also a major use of the Ottomans' second great innovation, enormous siege cannons, the largest of which was 27 feet long and fired 1,500-pound stone balls. These siege weapons, which were much more powerful than anything any previous empire had used, were able to destroy the walls surrounding Constantinople and allowed the Ottomans to take the city. These weapons would become more and more advanced as time went on, though the Ottomans would not live long enough to see any siege weapons after World War I, as they went extinct. The final innovation is regarding the Ottomans' limited, though present, religious tolerance. Though the empire was Muslim, they did allow Christians and other religions to live within their empire, though to a limited capacity. Non Muslims were protected and given general autonomy, though they were not given full equality by the government, and minorities were required to pay a special tax known as the jizya. Unit 4, the British Empire. The British, who started to really flourish and expand worldwide in the 15 and 1600s, used some of its exceptionally powerful innovations to conquer and thrive for centuries. These innovations include officer education, more modern guns, and advanced Navy ships. Probably the most important innovation was that of their Navy, which consisted of brand new flutes and carracks. The flute, which was originally a Dutch ship, was highly adopted and used extensively by the British, who, in my opinion, revolutionized how these ships were used compared to the previous generations in peacetime and war, including trade around the globe. The British Empire also significantly modernized firearms for its troops. Muskets, like the Brown Bess, became standard issue and reduced the time it took to fire a weapon down to about a minute and even faster for the more experienced troops. This is a massive change from the much slower, less accurate blunderbusses and other earlier firearms, giving the British a small edge in that regard. Finally, the British also began a special training regime for their officers, allowing them to become competent in their position and lead the lower ranks well without any question as to their rank superiority. This allowed the British to have intelligent decisions made on the battlefield down the chain of command, from colonel to sergeant. Unit 5, the French Empire. The French Empire utilized new techniques in an ever changing world that helped them to become one of the most powerful empires in their day. These innovations and techniques include mass conscription, skirmish tactics, and the corps d'armée system. Mass conscription is a term used to describe when French civilians were taken up off the streets and enlisted into the army during times of war. This allowed the French to gain a massive amount of men who, when they were most needed, versus other countries who mostly had only volunteers. The French also used somewhat new tactics to counter the earlier line warfare, that being skirmish tactics. These tactics, which is similar to guerrilla warfare, allowed the French to maneuver around British and other enemy armies, surprise attacking them from unconventional places, and generally go against what had been done for decades before with large armies fighting on pre-planned large flat grasslands. Finally, the French also used the Corps d'Armée system. This revolutionary system organized soldiers and officers into mini armies, allowing them to act how they saw fit, leading to more efficient and autonomous troops. Unit 6, the United States. The innovations created by the United States are vast, but key ones stand out, those being nukes, joint warfare, and the military industrial complex. Nuclear bombs, which were first tested and used by the United States during World War II, created what is today the most dangerous weapon known to mankind. These weapons of mass destruction are capable of destroying nations, and trillions of dollars have been spent to create them and defend against them. They were one of the most important military innovations of all time, and the United States perfected them. They almost completely changed warfare forever, as now, nations can no longer use their full strength in combat and instead had to use weaker weapons to avoid total world destruction and use proxy wars to fight enemies that also had nukes. The second innovation was joint warfare. With the world now having advanced navies, air forces, marines, and army factions in their militaries, cooperation between these branches was necessary for efficient combat. The United States is widely considered the first to perfect this, with their Air Force, Navy, and ground troops working together in almost every operation to totally destroy the enemy. Finally, the United States was the first nation to truly militarize their industrial economy. During the Second World War, the United States went from being a dormant, somewhat stagnant country under the Great Depression to becoming the most powerful and dominant nation in the world has ever seen. This is because the sheer amount of industrial output achieved during the Second World War, and the United States never went back to how it was before the war and most likely never will. This military industrial complex has led the United States to be more advanced in their military than any other nation in the world. Units 7, 8, and 9. The United States and Russia/the Soviet Union. For the final units, the two most dominant nations would be the Soviet Union, now known as Russia, and the United States. These nations continue to dominate the military landscape in the modern era to this day. Some of the innovations of these nations, which led them to this historic rise in power, include chemical weapons, UAVs and drones, rockets, and computers, and this includes AI. Chemical weapons, which technically had been used before in World War I before the Geneva Convention, were developed almost solely by the Soviet Union during the Cold War and their attempt to outdo America. The Soviets developed the most massive chemical weapons program in the world during the Cold War, developing a mass amount of nerve and blister agents. This differs from the chemical used in the past like mustard gas, with these newer chemicals being much more sophisticated and deadly. Drones, which are remotely controlled devices, were largely pioneered by the United States by companies like Northrop Grumman. These drones, some of which were combat and some of whom were reconnaissance drones, changed the landscape of war forever, as they removed the need for manpower on the field in these positions, and as time has gone on, they have decreased the amount of deaths in combat by the hundreds of thousands. Rockets, which are either for combat or for exploration, were largely developed and pioneered as well by the United States, though the Soviet Union was also part of this development in technology. Originally, the first rockets were developed by the Germans in World War II, and when these scientists came to the United States following the collapse of the Third Reich, the US massively expanded the usefulness of these devices, innovating how they could be used for war. They allowed the ability for nuclear bombs and other ballistic missiles to be sent thousands of miles away at the press of a button, giving countries unprecedented access to destroy foreign entities. This began a culture of prevention and avoidance rather than direct combat, as now countries could destroy each other so fast that the world was now under a pact of mutually assured destruction. Computers, including AI, are arguably some of the more recent and innovative technologies that militaries of the world have developed and integrated. The countries most recognized for their innovations in AI and computers are the United States and Russia, and both these countries have integrated computers into their main military design. For example, telemetry data collected by troops and by surveying devices in the field are compiled for real-time updates during combat, drastically increasing the efficiency of movements and attacks, as well as preparing men for defensive operations as well. With the increasing capabilities of AI, this tool is also being used in today's military with the ability to advise and automate some parts of the tedious duties that were previously fulfilled by humans, like when exactly to release bombs and automated turrets. Throughout the history described in this video, some of the devices and tactics used have changed drastically throughout time. Where bows and arrows had once thrived, guns took their place, and where cannons and artillery had once been the go-to weapon for sieging, bomber planes and rockets made them somewhat obsolete. However, one fact remains true. Humanity will continue to innovate new ways to scare, injure, and eventually destroy itself. Though the methods have changed over time, there remains a continuity in the purpose of each innovation and tactic, and that is to overcome and defeat one's enemy. This can be summarized well in Arthur Koestler's book, The Ghost of the Machine. If one looks with a cold eye at the mess man has made of history, it is difficult to avoid the conclusion that he has been afflicted by some built-in mental disorder which drives him towards self-destruction. Thank you for watching my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And shout out Mr. Kanak. This project was an excellent idea. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed. Goodbye.